Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're having a good day today, but let's be honest, it's going to be a better day once you figure out how to divide positive and negative decimals. So let's get into it. Now, when you are dividing decimals, the very first thing that I always tell my students to do is why don't we determine what the sign is going to be for our final answer? Is it going to be a positive solution? Is it going to be a negative solution? And we can determine that by just using our multiplying and dividing rules. If your numbers have the same signs, whether they're both positive or both negative, your final answer is always going to be positive. But if they're different signs where one's positive and one's negative, your final answer is always going to be negative. So for number one, we have 3 and 82 hundredths, and that's negative, and we have 4 tenths, which is positive. Those are different signs, meaning our final answer is going to be negative right off the bat without even doing any math whatsoever. So we know this is equal to some negative value. And I don't want you to factor in this negative sign in your division problem. I've seen students do that in the past where they make the number negative and ends up screwing them up. So you just need to realize, hey, my answer is already negative, and kind of ignore that negative sign throughout the process of this. Now let's go ahead and divide these. So the first number is always going to be on the inside, which is known as your dividend. So this is 3 and 82 hundredths divided by 4 tenths, and this is known as your divisor, the number on the outside. Now the number on the outside, you want to change it so it's no longer a decimal. So we do that by moving the decimal point as far right as it can possibly go. So for this one, the furthest we can go is moving it one place value to the right, making it 4 now. But when that change happens, you also have to move the decimal point that's on the inside, or your dividend, one place value to the right. And now we have a new problem that looks like this. On the inside is going to be 38 and 2 tenths divided by 4 now. And before we go ahead and actually divide these, the only other thing I tell my students to do is move your decimal point up into the final answer, or your quotient. That way you don't place it in the wrong spot. So the decimal point, you move straight up into the quotient, or your final answer to a division problem. And now we can go ahead and finally divide these. So how many times does 4 fit into the number 3? Well, it doesn't. So I'm just going to put a 0 here as a placeholder. You don't necessarily have to do that. I'm just doing it to show you. And then how many times does 4 fit into the number 38? Well, it fits 9 times without going over. So we're going to write a 9 here. And notice how that decimal point's already laid out for us where it's going to be in our final answer. So we don't accidentally put it like in front of the 9, for example. So 4 times 9 is 36. We're going to subtract that from the 38 that we just used. So we get a remainder of 2. 4 does not fit into 2 at all, so we bring down the number that we still have, which is another 2. And then 4 fits into 22 5 times, and that's now going to go behind the decimal point. 4 times 5 gives us 20. We're going to get a remainder of 2. However, we are now out of numbers. Well, what do I do now? If you add a 0 behind the 2 that we just utilized, that's not going to change the value of 38 and 2 tenths. You adding a 0 there just continues the process of dividing until we don't have a remainder anymore. Or if we determine maybe it's a repeating decimal, for example. So now we can keep going. We bring down a 0. I know I'm cramming for space here, and that's a 20. Well, how many times does 4 fit into 20? And it fits perfectly 5 times. And we're going to end up with a remainder of 0. So we're done here, and our final answer is 9 and 55 hundredths. However, don't forget that it was negative. So we have negative 9 and 55 hundredths for the first one. So these take a decent amount of work. You know, sometimes you might have to do a little bit of multiplying on the side depending on what numbers you're working with. But as long as you take your time on dividing decimals, these aren't too bad. So let's go ahead now and take a look at number 2. So let's get rid of all of this work here because I'm going to use up as much space as I possibly can for these, just because I want to cram as much problems or different types as I can, you know, in one video, so you don't have to go scavenge somewhere else for a different video or anything like that. Right, let's go ahead and take a look at number 2. We have 76 hundredths divided by negative 3 and 2 tenths. Again, we have different signs, so final answer or solution is going to be negative. And now let's go ahead and set up our division problem. So we have 76 hundredths as our dividend, again, the number on the inside, and negative 3 and 2 tenths is going to be our divisor. Again, don't worry about that negative sign because you know your solution's negative already. And now let's go ahead and move our decimal point. It looks like we can move it one place value to the right, which means we can also do the same thing in our dividend. And our new problem is going to be 7 and 6 tenths on the inside, and 32 on the outside. Now let's move our decimal point up into our quotient, and we can go ahead and start dividing these. 32, does it fit into 7? No, so we're going to put a 0 there. That decimal point's already in a nice spot for us, so we can just keep going. How many times does 32 fit into 76? Well, it fits twice. 32 times 2 gives us 64. And when we subtract these, we get a remainder of 12. Now, 32 doesn't fit into 12 at all, but we're definitely not done yet. So we can just add a 0 and bring it down. So 0, bring it down. Well, how many times now does 32 fit into 120? And it's going to fit 3 times. So I'm just going to extend this bar out a decent amount here. So we have 3. 32 times 3 is going to give us 96. And we subtract here. 120 minus 96 is going to give us 24. Well, 32 doesn't fit into 24. So once again, add a 0. Bring it down once again, and then we can just continue the process over and over again. Well, 32 fits into 240 7 times, and that's going to give us 224. So we subtract those, we get a remainder of 16. Once again, 32 doesn't fit into 16, so let's add an additional 0 and bring it down. And now how many times does 32 fit into 160? Well, it fits 5 times perfectly. So now we're going to end up with a remainder of 0. So our final answer is 2,375 10,000ths. However, we want to make sure that it's negative. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit it in that small space, so I'm just going to write the answer above the problem. So it was, we're going to put equals negative 0.2375. That way I don't cram it into number 3 there. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of all of this work, and then we'll move on to our third one. Right, for number 3, we have 82 and 8/10 divided by 300ths. I noticed that they're same signs, so we're going to have a positive solution. And now we can go ahead and set this up and divide these. So 82 and 8/10 is our dividend. 300ths is going to be our divisor. And it looks like this time around we want to move the decimal point 2 place values to the right. So we're going to move it once to the right, twice to the right, and then we want to do the same thing in our dividend. So if we move this once to the right, you're going to notice that we're now out of numbers. Well, you can still move it one more time to the right. The only thing is we're then going to add in a placeholder 0 there to fill that spot. So now we can go ahead and rewrite our problem with these decimal point changes. So this is now going to be 8,280 with the decimal point still sitting behind that 0. And on the outside is going to be 3. We'll move our decimal point up into our quotient here, and now we can go ahead and divide like normal. How many times does 3 go into 8? Well, it fits twice. 3 times 2 is 6. Subtract, we get a remainder of 2. 3 does not fit into 2 at all, so we bring down a 2. 3 fits into 22 7 times. 3 times 7 is 21. We subtract, we get a remainder of 1. 3 fits into 1 0 times, so we bring down an 8. 3 fits into 18 6 times perfectly, so we subtract, we get a remainder of 0. However, we still have one more number that we have to utilize, and 3 doesn't fit into 0 at all, so that's when we tack on a 0 here, and we are done. And our final answer is going to be 2,760. That decimal point's not necessary because we ended up getting a whole number, so our solution is going to be equals 2,760, and it's positive for number 3. And now let's go ahead and get rid of our work and move on to number 4. Let's make sure we just have as much space as we possibly can going into our last 2. And then I do have 5 questions I want you to try out on your own as well here in a little bit. So for number 4, we have same signs, positive solution. Now we can go ahead and set these up. So 850 and 5/10 is going to be our dividend, and on the outside is going to be 5. Now what's nice about this is that our divisor is not a decimal at all. We can go ahead and divide these right off the bat. So move our decimal point up into our final answer, and now we can go ahead and divide these. How many times does 5 go into 8? Once, so we subtract, we get a remainder of 3. 5 doesn't fit into 3, so bring down the 5. 5 goes into 35 7 times perfectly, so we subtract here, we get a remainder of 0. 5 doesn't go into 0, so bring down the 0. 5 still doesn't go into 0, so that's when we tack on a 0 up top. The decimal point's already sitting there nicely for us, and then we finally bring down our last number, and 5 fits into itself one time perfectly, and then if we were to subtract those, we would get a remainder of 0. So our final answer is going to be 170 and 1/10, and it's positive because we determined at the very beginning that it's same signs positive solution, and then we finally have one number left before your practice session. So I noticed for number 5 they're different signs, so it's going to be a negative solution, and now we can go ahead and set these up. So we have 882 thousandths as our dividend, and we have 4 thousandths as our divisor here. So we're going to move it 3 place values to the right. We want to do the same thing then in our dividend, and then I'm going to rewrite the problem up here now. So we have 882 as our dividend, and 4 is our divisor, and we want to make sure that that decimal point's still sitting there in our dividend because it didn't just magically go away. And then I want to move it up into my quotient, and now we can go ahead and divide these. Well, 4 fits into 8 2 times perfectly, so 4 times 2 is 8. We subtract, we get a remainder of 0. 4 doesn't fit into 0, so bring the 8 down. 4 fits into 8 perfectly twice once again, so we subtract, we get a remainder of 0. 4 doesn't fit into 0, so we bring down a 2. Well, 4 doesn't fit into 2. Hello. Hold on. We'll pause for this moment. He wants a little bit of camera time. Hello. How was your nap? You want to say hello to the camera? Oh. Do you want to say hello to the camera? Look, you're on the big screen. All right, we'll let him have his moment, and we'll be back here in a second. All right, well, he didn't want to leave, so I'm just going to pretend like he's not here while we film this. So 4 doesn't fit into 2 at all, so we're going to add a 0 up top, but we still want to keep going, so we're going to add an additional 0 and bring that down. And then how many times does 4 go into 20? Well, it fits 5 times perfectly. 4 times 5 is 20, and we end up with a remainder of 0. So our final answer is going to be negative 220 and 5/10 for number 5. So that's the 5 questions I wanted to show you in helping you understand dividing decimals by other decimals, whether they're positive or negative. But before you go, I have 5 questions I want you to try out on your own on a separate sheet of paper. So let's go ahead and show you the next 5. Now, here we are with the practice session. Me and Bob wanted to show you the 5 questions we want you to try out on your own. So we encourage you to pause the video, try out all 5 questions and see if you can get the correct solution. And then when you think you have them all right, play the video and see how you did. Now, I'm assuming at this point you've gone over all 5 questions on a separate sheet of paper and you're ready to go over the answers. Now, I don't know when he's going to leave. Me and him had a chat earlier. He doesn't seem like he's going to be moving anytime soon. So I'm just going to go over number 1. So these are different signs. One's positive and one's negative. So our final answer has to be negative because they're different signs. So now we can go ahead and divide these. So 2.8 is going to be the dividend, or the number on the inside, and our divisor is going to be 1 and 25 hundredths. So let's move our decimal point 2 place values to the right. And then on the inside, we also want to do I guess that was his time. And then on the inside, we want to move it 2 place values to the right as well. So let's move it once to the right and then twice to the right. And we want to make sure that we just add a 0 as a placeholder there. And then that decimal point's still going to be behind the 0. And now we can go ahead and rewrite this. So 280 with a decimal point at the end is on the inside, or our dividend. And our divisor is going to be 125. And then let's move that decimal point up into our final answer. And then we can go ahead and actually divide these now. 125 doesn't fit into 2. It doesn't fit into 28, but it does fit into 280 twice. 125 times 2 is 250, so we subtract. We get a remainder of 30. Well, 125 doesn't fit into 30 at all, so let's add a 0 and bring that down. 125 fits into 300 twice again, so we're going to subtract 250. We get a remainder of 50. 125 doesn't fit into 50, so add an additional 0 and bring that down. And then 125 fits into 500 4 times perfectly, and if we were to subtract that, we would get a remainder of 0. So our final answer is going to be negative 2 and 24 hundredths for number 1. So hopefully you're 1 for 1 right now. Moving on to number 2. So again, let's have as much space as we possibly can. And number 2, we have same sign, so positive solution. And now we can go ahead and write this in. So 84 hundredths is our dividend, and 2 8/10 is our divisor. It looks like we're moving this one place value to the right for both of them, and then we can rewrite them. So it's going to be 8.4 in the dividend and 28 as our divisor, and we're going to move our decimal point up into our final answer. Well, 28 doesn't fit into 8 at all, but it does fit into 84 perfectly 3 times. So 28 times 3 is going to give us 84. We subtract these, we get a remainder of 0, and we're done just like that. Our final answer is positive 3/10 for number 2, and then we can move on to number 3. Again, making as much space as we possibly can, going into the final 3 here. So different signs, negative solution. Let's go ahead and figure out where we're moving our decimal points. So we have 9 3/10 divided by 2/10. We're moving it one place value to the right, which means we're doing the same thing with this one. And now we can go ahead and rewrite this. So this is going to be 93 point on the inside and 2 on the outside. We're going to move our decimal point up into our final answer. 2 fits into 9 4 times. 2 times 4 is 8. We subtract, we get a remainder of 1. Well, 2 doesn't fit into 1 at all, so we bring a 3 down. 2 fits into 13 6 times. 6 times 2 is 12. We subtract, we get a remainder of 1. Well, 2 doesn't fit into 1 at all, so let's add a 0 behind that decimal point and bring it down. And then 2 fits into 10 5 times perfectly. Subtract, we get a remainder of 0, and our final answer is going to be negative 46 5/10. I'm going to write that up here. So negative 46 5/10 for number 3. So hopefully you're 3 for 3 right now, and then we have 2 more to go, and hopefully you are the champ, going 5 for 5 and dividing positive and negative decimals. So for number 4, I see same signs, positive solution. Let's go ahead and set this up. 8.4 is going to be on the inside, or a dividend. 9.6 is going to be our divisor. We're going to move this one place value to the right for both, and then we'll rewrite it up here. So we have 84 point, and then on the outside we have 96. We'll move our decimal point up into our final answer. Well, 96 doesn't fit into 84 at all, so that's going to be 0. And then we're out of numbers, so all we're going to do is tack in an additional 0. And how many times does 96 fit into 840? 96 fits into 840 8 times, so we're going to put an 8 up top. 96 times 8 is 768. And then we'll go ahead and subtract these. Well, 0 minus 8 you can't do, so let's borrow. That becomes a 3, that's a 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. 3 minus 6 you can't do, so borrow. That's a 7. I know it's crammed a little bit, but 13 minus 6 is 7, and 7 minus 7 is 0. Well, 96 doesn't fit into 72 at all, so let's add a 0, bring that down. How many times does 96 go into 720 now? Well, that's going to be 7 times. 96 times 7 is 672. So we subtract here. 0 minus 2 we can't do, so we borrow here. That's a 1. This is now a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 1 minus 7 you can't do, so let's borrow. That becomes 11. 11 minus 7 is 4. And then 6 minus 6 is 0. 96 doesn't fit into 48, so add another 0, bring it down. And then finally, 96 fits into 480 perfectly 5 times. So we subtract 480 here, and we end up with a remainder of 0. So our final answer, and it's going to be a positive solution because they're same signs, we get 875 thousandths for number 4. So a decent amount of work for number 4, and then we're moving on to the very last one. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of this work here, just so we have space for the very last one. So we have different signs. Once again, it's going to be a negative solution. Let's rewrite this now so we can remove the decimal point on the divisor side of things. So we have 0.682, and we have 0.004, and then let's move our decimal point 3 place values to the right on the outside and the inside, and we're going to end up getting 682 point on the inside, and on the outside is going to be 4. Let's move our decimal point up into our quotient, and then we can go ahead and divide these. So 4 fits into 6 once. 4 times 1 is 4. We subtract, we get a remainder of 2. 4 doesn't fit into 2, so bring down an 8. 4 fits into 28 perfectly 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. We subtract, we get a remainder of 0. Well, 4 doesn't fit into 0, so we bring down a 2, and it still doesn't fit into 2, which means we need to tack on a 0 now. And then finally, let's add a 0, bring it down, and then 4 fits into 20 perfectly 5 times, giving us a remainder of 0. So our final answer for number 5 is going to be 170 and 5/10. We just want to make sure that it's negative because they were different signs. I hope this video helped you guys out in dividing decimals by other decimals, whether they're positive or negative, and you went 5 for 5 in the practice session. If this video helped you out in dividing decimals, please leave a like on the video letting me know that I did a good job. Comment any other topics you may want to see in the future, and of course subscribe, turn on that bell for post notifications letting you know when I upload next. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you in the next one with some more mathematics. Take care.